Welcome to Society and Culture in the New Republic, 1790 to 1810. This is Melinda Cole Klein. During the first few decades following the American Revolution, national policies and the proper economic direction was hotly debated not only in Congress, but in newspapers and public debates. Neither the government nor the public was convinced that one direction would be a solution. Why did the national direction need to be agrarian or industrial? Can we have both? Why or why not? Thomas Jefferson argued the best direction for the national economy was agrarian expansion and family-based entrepreneurial enterprises. After the acquisition of the Louisiana Territory during the president's first term in office, and the war that would commence the following decade, even Thomas Jefferson would be convinced that a blended economy would be the best for the nation. Having seen firsthand the social impact of industrialization in Europe, Jefferson and other like-minded politicians refused to see the exclusive growth of manufacturing towns, as they were aware of the corruption and poverty it would bring. In addition, the newly rich industrial base were a class of people not to be trusted, typically immigrants lacking the middle-class standards regarding how to treat your workers and conduct business in an ethical manner. Profits drove industrialization, and this principle made former penniless immigrants wealthy as industrialists. Industrialization, past and present, affects family roles, displaces male authority, and working for menial wages keeps factory workers at or near the poverty level. For this reason, Jeffersonians argued small, family-based businesses with the pride of ownership would keep families together while growing the economy. Large-scale manufacturing of metal weaponry and artillery, industrial machinery, and railroads, like the Iron Horse, grew out of an expanding economy situated in a nation with extensive lands in which market goods needed to move from entrepreneur to local markets or to ship goods to faraway lands. In time, especially after the Second War with Britain, Jeffersonians by 1815 agreed that to remain independent, the United States needed a measure of industrialization, knowing its effects would increase poverty and contribute to the growth of a corrupt business class. All the while, this expanding industrial structure would demand a free labor employee base. During the early decades of the 19th century, the American Republic consisted of several distinct regions joined by transportation and commercial activity. Number one, in the Northeast there was farming, shipbuilding, and long-distance trade for New England and Mid-Atlantic ports. Number two, on the western frontier, families farmed and created small towns to which residents shipped their surplus goods to markets in the East using the railroad and assisted by telegraph communication. Number three, in the South, the world demanded by 1800 cotton cloth. This assisted in the growth of the English and American textile industries. In the New Republic, thousands of people seized the opportunity to improve their lives. In doing so, they strengthened American values of moral living, individual opportunity, and personal autonomy. those values transformed the nation. This society had a firm desire to supply goods to growing needs of not only their world, but the outside world, promoting international trade, thus creating distant economic relationships. As the market expanded, it weakened long-standing commitments to a just or fixed price for goods and other values of a moral economy. Like during the colonial period, some farmers held on to their harvest crops but did not sell them until supplies ran low and prices were higher. To many, these economic practices were unethical. But without economic guilds or sharp community pressure, Americans after the Revolution became more determined to profit as economic uncertainty prevailed. After all, the U.S. economy was unproven, and the social structures of old were weakened. This could be said of apprenticeship. During the colonial period, an apprentice should expect, after the trade education was complete, a young adult would set up for himself or become a partner in the firm that trained him. After the American Revolution, it was cheaper to hire unskilled workers. Unskilled labor cost less and allowed for inexpensive manufactured goods. While the craftsman of old could provide material goods for his family, working-class families that worked for wages could not even afford the shoes that they produced at the factory of their employ. This is only one example to consider. Thomas Jefferson called his election to the presidency the Revolution of 1800, and his supporters believed that his victory would bring a dramatic change in the character of the nation. This president of 1800 stood contrary to the views of the Federalist Party, still holding on to dreams of a powerful, centralized nation, while the nation was in its early development period. Jefferson's idea, supported by the emerging Republican Democrats, called for states' rights and to a return to an ideal of a simple agrarian economy as the proper path for the republic. American society was changing rapidly. It became impossible for the Jeffersonian dream to prevail because of the following 3 points I would like to cover. Number 1, Federalists argued that the United States needed to create a healthy industrial base, like that in England. At least in the northern states, industrial capitalism began to take shape, resulting in the creation of manufacturing centers that demanded a free labor market. Number 2, with all the land yet to settle after the acquisition of the Louisiana Territory, politicians bent towards industrialization and argued that to shift to a free market-based economy, slavery, indentured servitude, and even the training opportunities of apprenticeship were incompatible with a wage labor economy. Number 3, its eastern cities were growing in population due to the arrival of new immigrants and natural increase of the resident population. These factors contributed to expansion west and south, which enabled the national economy to grow. To strengthen U.S. claims to the Pacific, President Jefferson sponsored an exploration west. Like explorers from the mid-15th century, Thomas Jefferson was interested in expanding trade with the Orient. If under his watch as president, a team of explorers could locate a trade route across the continent to the Pacific. This would foster trade by way of an American transportation route. Thus, the President supported the exploration of Lewis and Clark to discover, to begin with, the source of the Missouri River. This expedition was longer than expected, as it ran from 1804 to 1806. Lewis and Clark kept illustrated journals of their travels of what they found. They made detailed maps as well. After wintering in the Dakotas, they proceeded west with the help of a female Shoshone guide, Sacagawea. They crossed the Rocky Mountains to Oregon and made it back to North Dakota by 1806. In all, the trip took 28 months to complete. Jefferson had given them up for dead, and the expedition a failure, but he was happily proven wrong when word came from the exploring team of their survival and what they found. While President Jefferson's expedition did not find a short route to the Pacific, by 1863 and later in 1869, the United States could boast 2 transcontinental railway systems. This innovation in mechanized transportation shortened the time it took from one point to another, connected rural and urban markets, which grew the national economy, while it lessened the cost of moving people and goods from coast to coast. Families were moving to the western frontier areas, a pattern that had continued since colonial times. Until the 1790s, farming as a family-based enterprise was a way of life that provided households with a variety of commercial goods, including vegetables, milk, cheese, apples, bacon, or other pork products, whiskey along with beer and cider, fresh eggs and baby chickens, grains such as wheat, barley, and corn, to include other raw materials such as cotton, furs, or lumber products. Transportable surpluses such as grains and live animals made their way from rural farming communities to nearby market towns that enabled the farmer to buy clothes, shoes, linens, tools, and other manufactured or imported products that the family needed. In rural farming communities prior to commercialization, neighbors borrowed from one another and exchanged services. This is what is called the bartering system. Women traded eggs, baby chicks, and herbs for vegetables, seedlings, and other necessary items they could not produce themselves. Money in coin circulated little. Thus, farm-made products traded between neighbors and local towns. After the American Revolution, cheap land and opportunity for families lay out on the frontier. In the growing hill country frontiers of Kentucky, Maine to Tennessee, Georgia, Missouri, and Mississippi, settlements were spread apart. Churches were rare and not easily accessible by farmers who typically put in 14-hour workdays tending to animals and crops or in the production of commercial farm goods. Who were the frontiersmen and their families? Well, they were usually poor, but most often self-supportive, with neighbors helping neighbors. Oftentimes, they were new immigrants or sons and daughters from established Eastern families looking for their own farm and way of life. While Anglo-Americans and European immigrants dominated frontier communities, the westward migration also included runaway slaves, single women and men, and small-time businessmen. When Jefferson purchased the French territory of Louisiana, this constituency, farmers and family-based business entrepreneurs, benefited the most from this territorial change. This frontier group shared the following 5 common similarities. Number 1, they lacked religion and education. They lived by their own moral codes of conduct while honor and duty ran deep, while they valued self-sufficiency and self-preservation. Number 2, they were not above marrying Indian women. After all, white women were scarce. Number 3, they plowed and harvested on their farms while they shot game in woodland areas. Number 4, they enjoyed somewhat independent political lives. And number 5, frontiersmen and their families drank a lot of beer and whiskey, depending on the availability by type. American population growth in cities, ever more dependent on the production of consumable farm products, drove the national economy and continued the expansion of it. In particular, industrialization in the Northeast led to population growth of manufacturing centers. These areas required an ever-increasing demand for food products and raw materials from the countryside. This commercial demand, as mentioned, drove the national economy. It would be during the 19th century that farming practices took on industrial formulas such as the division of labor and production specialization. Business-minded ideas transformed the former self-sufficient farmer into a specialist. Local farmers became dairy farmers, fruit wholesalers, cattle barons, and wheat and corn producers exclusively. This farming shift in the production of one commercial good, instead of producing many goods in efforts to be self-supportive, led to the development of commercial farming. As farming became a commercial enterprise, farms grew in size to maximize output and profits. It also affected family work roles. Before the commercialization of farming, women tended gardens, raised chickens, and milked cows and tended to apple trees while the men were out in the fields. After farming became commercialized, men ran commercial dairies, for example, not their wives. Women's place in the new republic had narrowed. If she married, her roles tended to be to the household and management of it, including family care, production of children, and love and care of the needs of her husband. In the Chesapeake Bay area, tobacco by the 1790s had greatly depleted the soil. Many Virginians, anxious to do well like their fathers and grandfathers, headed west and south during territorial expansion. The ones remaining in the Chesapeake Bay area switched to grain and livestock. Because a large labor force was unnecessary, Southerners began hiring laborers from nearby towns and sold their slaves to migrating Southerners. In Virginia, upwards of 1 million slaves after the Revolution were sold to planters heading to the new southern and western frontiers of Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. And it was Virginia law that free blacks could not remain in the state as Virginians did not want a free black population or communities of blacks. The planting of U.S. cotton was practiced mostly in the Carolinas during the colonial period. However, before the 1790s, the staple cotton plant yielded low cotton per acre, left much in plant waste, and tended to be a temperamental plant, as it was sensitive to climate and also plant diseases. Three factors transformed the Southern economy in the United States during the 1790s. Number one, the development of a hybrid cotton called short staple cotton that required less work to make a profit. Number two, humans worldwide demanded cotton clothing and textiles. Southern planters and cotton planters worldwide responded to the demands by the marketplace. Cotton planting drove by economics and consumer buying trends. Number three, the invention of the cotton gin by Eli Whitney. Eli Whitney, a Connecticut Yankee and graduate of Yale in 1792, left New England to study Southern cotton production and the laborious process of harvesting and cleaning cotton fibers by hand. Whitney is credited with inventing a simple machine that streamlined the process in 1793. The cotton gin was a wooden drum stuck with hooks. As it turned, the hooks pulled the cotton fiber through a mesh. The seeds could not fit through the mesh and fell outside. This machine increased the production of cotton by 50 times. This allowed planters using the cotton gin to harvest and clean 200 pounds of cotton a day, as compared with the rate of 1 to 4 pounds of cotton harvested and cleaned by hand using slave labor. Sadly, Whitney's company that produced cotton gins were so simple in design they were easily altered and improved upon by farmers, making it easy for pirating of his invention. Whitney went out of business by 1797. Cotton made economic sense to migrating Southern planters. Carolina planters who had formerly planted rice and the earlier version of cotton incorporated the planting of indigo, a plant that produced a beautiful blue dye for the growing textile industries sprouting up in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. By 1808, the English Parliament outlawed the transportation of free Africans from Africa for the purpose of slave labor. It was widely known for 20 years this was going to happen. So American Southerners imported record numbers of Africans between 1788 to midnight prior to January 1st, 1808. Though smuggling did continue by the Portuguese to the West Indies and Brazil in particular after this date. American courts at the state and federal level endorsed this foreign law and prosecuted smugglers. This helped to bring an end to the practice of African chiefs selling their own people into slavery because of the labor shortages in the Americans and the European practice to purchase labor to resolve their own difficulties. The fear of slave revolts by Southern plantation owners was increasing after the Revolution, a real concern for personal safety, material wealth, and the protection of private property. With slave riots came violence, death to owners and their family, never mind the destruction to private property, tools, and disruption of the family economy. While Southern planters experienced a few unsuccessful slave revolts, a successful 19th century slave rebellion to make history occurred not in the United States, but on the French island of Saint Dominic. Toussaint Louverture earned a place in history as an educated slave who desired to create a French republic populated by free blacks and whites. Inspired by religious and philosophical writings, this well-read Haitian slave saw bondage as a moral injustice and would, in time, inspire like-minded enslaved blacks and small-time Frenchmen to revolt against French rule. Because Toussaint's master had taught him to read and write from a young age, this allowed him access to the family library. The slave was able to read extensively on the latest philosophical tracts that included pamphlets following the French Revolution. It would be these writings, among others, that inspired him to revolt in order to form a free Haiti. As far as slaves go, Toussaint was privileged as compared with other slaves laboring on sugar islands. And by the time he and his militia rebelled against his French colony from 1791, destroying plantations and the lucrative slave economy in general, he was old, about 55 years old. However, the combination of his slave army with alliances made with small-time white planters proved to be a successful combination. After Napoleon came to power in France, it was believed that Saint Dominic could be brought into the French Republic. To reach this end, Toussaint was invited by the government of Napoleon to negotiate a peace settlement, thus re-establishing colonial rule. Believing this invitation, Toussaint traveled to France, but Napoleon kept no promise to negotiate. In his mind, this was absurd. Negotiate never. And with a former African slave on top of that, not even a consideration. Unfortunately for Toussaint, he was put in French chains after he arrived, sent to prison, and then left in his cell to starve to death. But the death of Toussaint did not return the Haitian people to French colonial rule. It retained its independence due to the protection of the United States. Because of Toussaint Louverture, Haiti became the first independent black republic in the Western Hemisphere and the second independent country of the Americas after the United States, when it declared its independence on January 1st, 1804. Did this rebellion inspire the French government to sell their territory of Louisiana to the U.S.? Perhaps. Toussaint and his militia had shown for years during this rebellion the ability to hold off re-establishment of slavery and colonial rule. This fact likely contributed in some way to Emperor Napoleon's ultimate decision to sell Louisiana to the United States. At the time, France was goal-oriented to create a French empire that included Europe and areas surrounding the Mediterranean Sea. Anyway, Louisiana Territory did not contribute to the French national economy, like the sugar colonies belonging to France in the Caribbean Sea. From the 1750s, and especially after the Revolution, many children from farming, trade, and artisan families grew up expecting that their father would not have much to give them to start out in life. The best average parents could do for their children, both boys and girls, would be to secure them an apprenticeship in which they would gain the trade skills through the recognized educational system. By the 1840s, household economies in the United States shifted from work done within the confines of the family home to the household economy that earned wages outside of the home. This would be completed by 1900. As fathers left the home for work, this reshifted the focus of the mother more back into the home. From the Middle Ages and through the colonial period, women working as wives and mothers were expected to contribute to the family economy. Thus, women helped their artisan husbands in his shop. Children, too, gained trade experience through this unofficial apprenticeship by their sheer existence in a family that plied a service or provided a product that was sold because of its commercial value. As the Northern American economy became more industrial, it drove growth and capitalism. Warehouses stored items that would be loaded and or unloaded onto ships, waiting for transport to their intended parties. The demand for middle management men is fundamentally tied with industrial growth and the commercial infrastructure needed to move goods and services between owners, sometimes over very long distances. Town businesses that dealt in shipping and receiving goods needed men who had a good head for figures, this means math, who could manage warehouse inventories and keep accounting ledgers. Another growing field was in clerking men, men with nice penmanship who could write letters and or add numbers correctly. Such men in the age before the typewriter and the calculator worked as clerks in financial counting houses and in the rising number of insurance companies that were founded in the new American Republic. Eastern and Southern families migrated from their communities to the vast frontier. Long distances from established religion meant less church-going. Hopefully, one relative within the frontier family or a neighbor could read aloud from the Bible to the children. But neighbors on the frontier were often many miles apart. Frontier families had to adapt to their environment for their sheer survival by becoming largely self-sufficient. The average lifespan for a frontier adult was about 30 to 35 years of age. Childhood mortality was about 50%. If frontier parents had 6 children, many considered them lucky if 2 survived to adulthood. In England and Europe in general, beverages containing alcohol were commonly consumed. This trend has ancient traditions, going back to the Egyptians, especially with the consumption of beer. In the European West, drinking was a social and celebratory act. All the while, water was considered unhealthy, often bringing death and disease. Thankfully, beverages such as coffee, tea, beer, cider, and spirits had been consumed in its place for centuries because they were made healthy through boiling, especially those containing alcohol. Milk would not be safe to drink until pasteurization. But by the 1790s, a visible population of single men in the cities and American ports living alone and not in families. They could not afford a family. Masculinity in this time and in our time was defined in the man's ability to support on his income a wife and family. communal drinking rituals of this population of single men in port towns took a turn towards drunkenness and disorder in the new republic. In a free society with little community regulation, this rowdy element became a noticeable feature of society that led directly to poverty and violence. Drunkenness from the 1600s was considered something the poor did, as they were incapable of self-regulation of their emotions and economic lives. In many colonies and states, disorderly living resulting from drunkenness was punishable by law. All the while, tavern hours of operations were regulated, alcohol had an excise tax, and proprietors had to pay a licensing fee to legally operate an establishment. By the 1790s, whiskey became the drink of choice of many of our seafaring men and dock workers in towns who experienced life unlike other men. In addition, it was cheaper than beer, rum, and cider, while it stimulated quickly. This transient lifestyle was partly due to the patterns of trade and seasonal work habits. For example, when northern harbors were frozen or engaged in little port activities, it made sense to hop a vessel to warmer ports of call, such as those in Latin America or the islands of the Caribbean. American whiskey drinking, also grain-based alcohols are known as spirits, were produced in abundance after the War for Independence. Whiskey was safer to drink than milk or water and also very cheap. So for hard-living seaport town occasional laborers, whiskey became the American drink of choice. Paralleling this trend was the consumption of Scotch and gin in Britain. While this style of drinking was not completely unique, and coincided with the growth of industrialization in Britain and also in America. This phenomenon created a shift in American drinking habits. In the past, drinking was for a purpose of sociability. By the 19th century, binge drinking emerged as a vice, as it was a pleasure-seeking practice, especially by social inferiors. By the 1820s, reformers labeled alcohol as a threat to a person's health. The middle-class social order, who illustrated the long practices of sexual modesty, moral restraint, self-denial, and dedication to work, fought long and hard to limit the access of alcohol to those Americans who had shown irresponsibility. As the Republic developed, reformers time and time again labeled alcohol as evil, while it is really the person who needs to exhibit responsibility. Banning alcohol does not work, as the 18th Amendment showed. Prohibition failed. From 1797 to the 1830s, the new republic witnessed a revival of religion, especially among Methodists, Baptists, and a new group called Mormons. But generally, with the rise of commerce, destruction of family unity and piety, along with fewer numbers of churches built on the frontier and in the South, the spread of Christianity fell to itinerant preachers. Out of this movement, the Second Great Awakening, came anti-slavery debates, a free education for American children, temperance that encouraged abstaining from alcohol consumption, and the most prevalent concern, ending poverty. The Second Great Awakening advocated that individuals must readmit God and Christ into their daily lives, must actively interact with others in church and matters of salvation, must reject rationalism, that threatened traditional beliefs, family authority, and community membership. However, the Second Great Awakening did not increase church attendance as experienced in the past. Too much in America had changed. As a nation of religious tolerance, the culture was diverse. But larger than this, American culture became secular, especially in the cities. In addition, the working class population had little free time in general after working long work hours at factories. Thus, among the working class, these are the wage laborers, church attendance was the worst. Americans wishing to detach themselves from traditions that would limit a freer lifestyle, such as activities of vice and substance abuse, tended not to join or attend rituals that advocated a structured, moral, and upright life. While Protestant traditions advocate, past and present, self-help, self-responsibility, and self-regulation, it would be the middle-class reformers from the 1820s who argued the loudest for social change. During the early 19th century, Americans migrated over vast distances which broke not only ties with their former communities, but established traditions. On the frontier with fewer churches, families attended worship in neighboring homes and perhaps attended local open-air meetings offered by traveling ministers. While the Second Great Awakening argued to create a better American society, their advocates had not worked out the details, such as what level of equality would former slaves have, how would free schools be paid for, and without a safe beverage for Americans to drink, what were they supposed to consume if they had to give up beer and cider? Water was well known to cause death and disease. Though reformers aimed change, especially in regards to social habits and to end slavery, as they considered it immoral, I would like you to remember 4 principles from this period reformers tried to promote. Number 1, to develop a free society allowing for the growth of a wage labor industrial economy, to end poverty, and also to end drunkenness among the working class, and finally, to offer a free public education for American youth as apprenticeship was in decline. Followers of the Second Great Awakening became popular with America's uneducated and politically powerless sections of society. These included non-readers such as free and enslaved blacks, women, poor white men, frontier families, and Native Americans. Some meetings were interracial. This movement tended to attract the working class and poorer groups. From these revivals sprang black preachers who promoted equality as a religious message, that salvation was available to all.